Good evening, everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here at WCNC in our Live Impact Weather Studio tonight. We'll call it Live Impact Weather Studio since we're doing weather, Live Impact Weather tonight. We're talking about finally maybe an end to rain. It's been a crazy 3-day stretch of rain. For some folks, it's been 4 days of rain, but really the past 48 hours, the most rain we've seen in a calendar day and a 2-day period the entire year so far. So this was a real soaker. We needed the rain, just didn't need it all at once, and we saw that flooding yesterday. So let's start with taking a look at the radar right now, because for the first time in a couple days, I don't have a lot to show you out there. There are some sprinkles, and I can tell you there's sprinkles for sure, because we can look at our Lylesville camera, which I might show you here in a minute. There are some showers falling out in Lylesville. And just so you know where Lylesville is, for folks that aren't familiar with our area, beautiful eastern Anson County, there it is, east of Wadesboro, before you get to the PD River going east into Richmond County. You see the sprinkles there? Let me bring up our quad cam. We'll show you the 4 cameras that we have pulled up right now across our area. And look at Anson County. The camera is completely covered in light drizzle and mist. Monroe, Lake Norman, and Dallas on our Mr. Sparky camera network showing just clouds and actually no rainfall currently falling in those areas. So still gray and cool out there, but we don't have the rain that is falling out to the east. Now today, we had heavy rain this morning. Many of you woke up to it. We were a little concerned. That's why we were alert for flooding. But the real issues today were up in the Raleigh area. They had several flood warnings, some water rescues ongoing up there. Some typical issues they have right around the mall there, the Crabtree Mall area. That seems to flood all the time. But today was definitely a more active day for areas in the Triangle and points east. I'm going to show you the warnings that are currently in effect. We'll pull the radar off, but you can still see the 2 flash flood warnings for Wake and Chatham County until 7 p.m. and flood warnings for Franklin, Johnston, Nash, and parts of Wake County until 7:30. Those had the considerable tag in the warning, which meant a lot of people's phones were going off in the Raleigh area today because that activates the WIA, or the Wireless Emergency Alerts, on your mobile device. So that was what was happening up there today. But let's look back at the last 48 hours. And again, I'll preface this with some of the sites aren't recording, like Monroe all of a sudden just went out today. Concord, you didn't get 0. I get complaints about this all the time. The Concord rain gauge is actually operated by the airport, not by the National Weather Service, so they can't really go do anything. So if you got any connections out at the Concord Airport, we'd love to get that rain gauge maintenance worked on, because it's an AWOS, not an ASOS, which is not operated by the Weather Service, and the FAA has to really kind of tell the local airport to fix it. But there's been rain in Concord, needless to say. But look at Charlotte. That's a 48-hour total, 3.68 inches of rain. That was almost our deficit for the year. We needed to get that rain. Gastonia, 3.58. And look at Rock Hill, almost 6 inches of rain. There were parts of York County that saw 6 inches of rain in the past 2 days. Chester, a whole lot. And if Monroe would plot, it would be well over 3 inches as well. But look at Raleigh today. You could see why Raleigh ended up with so much flood issues. They had over 3.5 inches of rain, and that was at the airport, which didn't even get the bulk of it. It was more the south side, kind of like here in Charlotte, where some parts on the south side of town ended up with 6 or 7 inches of rain over the past 48 hours. So let's take a look at the forecast for tonight, because it will be cool again. Temperatures are going to be falling back into the 60s. After we briefly got into the 70s today, it was technically warmer than yesterday when we had that crazy high of 69, 21 degrees below normal. So today, while it was warmer, it's still well below normal. The normal high is 90. And tonight, I can't rule out mist or drizzle. This is not going to be like heavy downpours, but kind of the typical foggy, drizzly, misty kind of setup as we go into the overnight hours. And just an area-wide view of those temperatures. You can see tonight, mid-60s, mostly cloudy. Probably some fog, likely forming low clouds. With all this moisture in the ground, it doesn't take a whole lot at night for us to cool down and start getting fog and low cloud formation. So we'll probably see that every morning for the next couple, even as we start to dry out. The mornings will be particularly kind of soupy. Tomorrow, we're heading back towards 80 possibly. But notice the northeast wind. Because of that northeast wind, even with sunshine, it'll be a real struggle to get too warm. Once the wind shifts to the south-southeast, that's when we start to see things kind of warm up here in the Carolinas. So the big impacts over the next couple of days, we're finally not talking about flood risk. We're talking about the potential for some sunshine, drying out, warmer air returning, and yes, drier conditions into the weekend. I put the lawnmower there because with all the rain this week, people will finally get a chance to mow their lawn for the first time in a while as things start to grow after this really hot, dry period we came out of, and now we're in this wet, cool period, which is going to spur a lot of lawns to start growing pretty heavily. So my son's got a lawn mowing business. He's going to be very active this weekend, I can tell you that. He'll be mowing a lot of lawns. Futurecast shows things kind of clearing out, northeast winds with sunshine tomorrow. There will be a 20% chance. It's one of those situations where I'm not going to say there's no chance of rain, but it's pretty low right now, less than 20%. Probably any rain we do see will be that mist or drizzle with the low clouds. But look at Friday, Saturday. That's abundant sunshine in the afternoons, and that means a warming trend going into the upcoming weekend. In fact, we'll likely see some low and mid 80s by the weekend. We're going to talk with Tim about this as well, but the tropics, a lot of things going on out there. We've got Dexter. We've got this tropical wave that's got a 60% chance of development. And remember the thing we were talking about on the coast? We started hinting at this yesterday, that is probably was shifting offshore and becoming less of a threat. Well, not only is that happening, but the chance of development has gone down to 30%. So if you're going to the beach this weekend, I'm even more optimistic that you're going to be just fine. In fact, that thing could probably stay offshore and not do much of anything at all. So you can actually see a little swirl of clouds there. It might briefly try to do a head fake on us, try to head towards the coast, and then go back out to sea. So if you see that happen, don't be shocked if it starts drifting northwest before it takes that turn off to the north and east. But right now, we're not overly concerned with that because it looks like it would fall apart for the most part and then drift away. Rain chances do stay pretty low, as I mentioned, 20% or less. By Monday, Tuesday, they could go back up, and I'm going to show you why. This is our long-range futurecast, and a couple things to note here. I'll pause it here as we go into Thursday, but I'm going to pause it again on Saturday. So I'm going to grab my cursor so we can kind of highlight a couple of things. So if there is a tropical low or some kind of low, it looks like it's out here. But notice what's happening down over Florida and the Gulf Coast. There's another little low that tries to form down there and maybe come up to the northeast. So that could actually induce some rain early next week. And you'll see this on really starting late Sunday, but probably Monday, Tuesday. The flow comes out of the south, and that means kind of more humidity, warmer temperatures, but also the chance of rain. And unlike the rain we just had, which is northeast winds and rain, this will be southerly winds and rain. And that usually means kind of soupy weather. It also looks like, looking long range, we're going to go back above normal. And I figured this was going to happen. We're not going to be done with summer. The average high right now is 90, but by this time frame, it actually will be back down to 89. So you're probably looking at some low and mid 90s. Not crazy hot, especially compared to what we just saw. But for this time of the year, it will be slightly above average. So the 10-day forecast, big game on Friday night. Panthers got their first preseason game, and it's not often in August for a preseason game. I can tell you it's actually going to be nice. Not super hot. We're not worried about thunderstorms, which is always another issue. We've seen some preseason games where there's been deluges at the bank, and it's been just crazy. So actually pretty decent weather. We'll go 10 days into the future, and we'll go way out into next week because I want to show you that the trend is, yeah, temperatures are probably going to get back into the upper 80s, maybe even the low 90s as we go to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week. That's not crazy hot, but compared to what we just had, it's going to feel warm, and it is just slightly above normal. And right now, if you had to ask me today, and I'll ask Tim the same question here momentarily, no threat from tropical systems likely in the next 5 to 7 days, maybe even 10-day period. But beyond there probably will be something we'll be keeping an eye on, and that's what we'll be talking about with Tim coming up next. So here's a look at your forecast locally. We'll bring in Tim Buckley from Greensboro. We're going to talk a lot about the tropics today. We got an update from Colorado State, and we might talk about fall foliage for everybody kind of pining for the fall season. So Tim, are you there?
I'm here. I'm accounted for. I'm still being assaulted by heavy drizzle here in Greensboro. I like to categorize drizzle. You have regular drizzle, wimpy drizzle, and then heavy drizzle. We're in that heavy drizzle mode right now up here. Not being seen on radar either, but it's coming down.
Yeah, I always say misty drizzle. It's a great stage name, and it's also a kind of weather we get. So. But yeah, we had some of that today as well. It's kind of, you look at the cameras. That's where the cameras become really valuable. You start looking at the cameras. Wow, there's mist out there, but nothing on radar. And that's a good point, Tim. Let's talk a little bit about that. Why sometimes things don't show up on the radar. I think a lot of times, because everybody's got radar on this thing right here, they think radar is like this uniform coverage, like everybody gets equal coverage. And in some ways, because it's on here, I like to use the analogy of it's like a cell phone signal or a tower. The farther away from the tower, the fewer bars you get. And when you're really far from the radar, you don't get really good coverage of some of this low stuff. And drizzle's pretty small. It doesn't really show up well on radar. So, yeah, talk about that, especially up towards you guys. We're in a radar hole, but you guys are sometimes even a worse radar hole, especially for things like drizzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're both in really bad positions when it comes to radar. I think a lot of viewers have probably heard us talk about that throughout the years, but the radars are far away. They're not close by. And so in our area, think about a radar beam. It's a real physical thing that has to move through the air, detect the rain, and then report back to the radar site. Well, in our case, the radar beam is either at about 4,000 feet coming in from Raleigh or at about 5,000 feet coming at us from Blacksburg, Virginia for our area. And so in that case, if you have rain that's happening below that threshold, below 4,000 feet, it just can't be seen. And drizzle is really close to the ground. It's shallow. It's not something that's happening way, way high up in the atmosphere. And so on a day like today, like you said, can be more helpful to look at a camera or simply to step outside to know if it's raining or not. And it looks like an error when you pull up the phone and it says, no rain for a 5-county area. But that's the reason why. But radar's not perfect. We can't see everything. If we had more, we might have a better look. But drizzle's tough.
Yeah, it's always one of those tough ones around here. And, sometimes some of the automated apps, they're using kind of a view of what the radar shows. And if it doesn't show anything on the radar, the app's going to tell you no rain's falling. That's why things like crowdsourcing, like MPing and cameras that tell us like actually what's happening are really useful. So for folks that use that, that's a great resource to us as meteorologists. When you tell us what's happening where you are, it's super helpful. Tim, let's talk a little about the rain today. Thankfully, we didn't see much flooding this morning. I don't know how you guys did this morning. We got about an inch, which was a lot of rain and thankfully didn't cause issues, but it really was like Raleigh's turn today. They got clobbered with the heavy rain this morning and into the afternoon.
They really did. And we were talking about this on the show yesterday, Brad, how we thought that there was somebody that was going to get hit by some heavy rainfall, but we couldn't say exactly exactly what county. And it turned out that it ended up being Chatham County and Wake County from what we could see, basically from Cary down just pretty close to, Pittsboro and areas like that. But I have the rain estimates here. This is over in that Raleigh area. So you check out from Cary to Morrisville. These are really populated areas. They're growing suburbs in that part of the state. 4 to 6 inches, that wasn't really even all day. That was mostly in a chunk of the day. So this is another one of these examples of in the summertime here, how we've seen these heavy rainfall events. You see how localized it is? I mean, it was only a little ribbon here, whereas if you were in Greensboro, well, we've had less than an inch. Lexington over to Charlotte, I know you guys had some rainfall, but it wasn't like this. So kind of the way it worked out is yesterday Charlotte got hit badly. Today the Raleigh area got hit pretty badly. Up here in the Tribe, we were kind of sandwiched. Both days we ended up being fine, and just annoying rainfall, which we can always deal with. But it's hard to pinpoint who gets the heavy rain in those situations in the summertime.
Yeah, it's today was definitely kind of, we knew somebody would, and ended up being Raleigh, and they got clobbered pretty good. They had a couple different bands go through there. So things are improving. We're going to see some drier, warmer weather for the weekend, still below normal, but we're starting to trend back to maybe summer, and that leads me to the next topic of discussion, which is the tropics, which we know are getting pretty active. And we had some things happen overnight, Tim, and we kind of, it's funny, last night when we talked about it on the show here, we talked about, hey, maybe this thing on the coast was starting to trend a little bit away from the coast. And lo and behold, today, the trends continue in that direction. Not only do they trend offshore, they're trending weaker. So things are looking up for people even on the coast that we might not see. I wouldn't say no impacts. There'll probably be some rough surf and maybe a few showers. But the impacts from any tropical development on the coast seem to be trending down.
I think so, and I think it's a good, word of advice or caution that, when you're far enough away, you're several days away, there's always things that can change. And in this case, kind of a good reason that we were saying, don't cancel those plans if you're headed out to the coast. There turns out to be probably no reason to. It looks like you might have some wet weather at times out east, especially, immediate coastlines. But for Charlotte, for Greensboro, inland North Carolina, I'm not expecting really any rain here at this point. Hopefully not anyway. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are all trending pretty dry as far as I can tell. What about for your area?
Yeah, we're trending dry. We're going 20% or less for pretty much the next several days, just because we might see some of that mist and drizzle in the morning. I think one thing that'll happen, because our ground's saturated and we've seen so much rain, it's still kind of soupy. I think morning low clouds and fog are probably going to be a thing we're going to see every morning before we kind of mix things out a little bit. But yeah, looking at the tropics in general, I know we have the wide view, you have the wide view, you have the close view. We have 3 systems out there that we're kind of monitoring. We've got Dexter, which I can't believe is still a tropical storm, holding on to its strength out there. I thought yesterday it might be back to depression or a remnant low. We've also got a pretty beefy tropical wave that came off the coast of Africa that has a 60% chance of development. That actually looks like the highest probability of doing something, but it looks like a fish storm. It stays out to sea. And then our little low closer to us, it has a 30% chance and now is moving away. But there's also some longer term stuff that looks like maybe weak disturbance in the Gulf at some point, maybe the Caribbean. But there's also a lot of misinformation out there. I know we've harped on this before, but I feel like we got to bring it up again because I've been hearing a lot about a hurricane hitting South Carolina in the next week, and there's just nothing remotely close to that happening. But as you mentioned, I think it's a good time to remind everybody we're heading towards the peak of the hurricane season. We need to start somewhat paying attention on a regular basis to what's happening out there. And today was also a significant day, Tim, because I don't know if you caught this, but Colorado State updated their hurricane season forecast today.
Yeah, and I think they were also highlighting that 2-week period over the next couple of weeks as being a better chance to be above active rather than below active, right? So that'll be something that we look on a sub-seasonal level that, hey, we should really be on the lookout the rest of the month because there are those signs that things are on an uptick. But let's take a look at the forecast here. It looks like they didn't change all that much compared to where they were back in April.
Yeah, and I should emphasize there was an update in between April and now that was identical to what we have right now. So I wanted to be in full transparency. Their early season forecast, which comes out in April at the Hurricane Conference down at South Padre, was 17, 9, and 4. They did an update. Was it in May, Lily, that they did it?
There was one in July.
July. Okay,
11th.
so they did one in July that actually was 16, 8, and 3. And so today's update, while basically the same numbers, I did peel back some cool things that you saw too, Tim, that they're kind of hinting at maybe some increased activity later this month or mid-month going into September, which is, kind of what we expect. But it is interesting that the forecast has stayed pretty consistent. And I do want to show you, too, I have the forecast from NC State. We got to stay local, right? We got to get the NC State forecast. The NHC, which is NOAA's forecast and average, just to put this all in perspective. So this is all updated. This is the latest that all of them have. So you see 12 to 15 storms from NC State, 16 from Colorado State, 13 to 19 from NOAA, and the average is 14. So pretty much everybody's still trending towards above average. And if you think we're already at the D storm and we're just into August, I think from a named storm standpoint, things are kind of trending exactly where you would expect from these forecasts.
They are, and it's always good to remind ourselves of the average too, because especially we've been kind of in a period of above average activity where most years have been pretty much above average. It's good to remind ourselves about that because 14 named storms to me, as of the last couple of years, doesn't even sound like that many. But that's the average amount. And it seems like this year a little bit more close to average. It is interesting, Brad. I don't know if you looked at this or talked much about this in your forecast, but the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic are kind of interesting this year compared to last and the years prior. They're not quite as scalding hot as they had been. It's still above average mainly overall, but kind of an interesting pattern that's kind of shaped out the last week or two.
Yeah, it's always a tough one because you're right. They are way cooler than they were last year, but last year and the year before, we got to remember, we're like these crazy, insane high temperatures. So while technically cooler than last year, they're still pretty warm, but it is a pretty dramatic change. And I think I have the sea surface anomaly map here. I'm going to widen it out here. You could see it's still above average, but it's much cooler than last year. If this is compared to average, so it's like. So that's like, you got to tell you this is compared to average. Compared to last year, there would be a lot of blue in the Atlantic right now because it would be well below last year. But last year we had record-breaking temperatures. I mean, there was water temperatures around the Keys. Remember last year that were like 100 degrees? It was like crazy, like bathtub. And so what I do think is interesting is in the Atlantic, it seems to be a little cooler than last year, but in the Eastern Gulf, it's trending a little warmer, I think, because of that ridge that was over us has actually warmed a lot of those areas closer to home. So those homegrown systems are something we're going to have to watch pretty closely going forward. But yeah, there's definitely some differences this year compared to last year in the Atlantic as far as temperatures are concerned. And I'm also like showing this because I like to see if La Nina is still kind of trying to come. It looks like we're still kind of neutral. There's nothing that's really and the La Nada stage might be what we end up with the rest of the season. So there was this hint of a weak La Nina, but I think it's going to stay neutral through the end of the season, which could lead us to talking about winter weather down the road, forecast-wise, what that's going to look like. But I'm not putting that out there yet. We've got to get through the hurricane season first. But Tim, I know you love the mountains like I love the mountains too. We love to get outside, and for whatever reason, as we notice every once in a while on social media, the preseason look at the leaf color has come to our attention, and I think somebody in the mountain, probably the tourism board up there, started putting out the average, peak color in the mountains. So I thought I'd bring up Evan Fisher, who's a good friend of ours over there in the Asheville area. He put together these KML maps a couple years ago for us, and they showed the peak color. And maybe it's because it's hot and humid this time of year. People like looking forward to cooler, drier weather. You also in the mountains, you're probably counting all your August fogs for possible snow, which is another cool folklore thing that we do. But just so people are kind of refreshed on the average peak color time. Now, this varies greatly from year to year based on the weather. If it's really warm in the fall, this could be later. If it's really cool, it could happen sooner. On average, it's all elevation dependent. If you want to see the first color of the season peak, you got to head of above about 5,000 feet in early to mid-October. But for the most part, if I had to say, Tim, I think in general, mid-October is kind of that sweet spot in the mountains where we tend to see pretty good color going into the season. I don't know if you've started to have viewers and followers start reaching out like, hey, talking about fall color, what do you think the season's going to look like? What do you think the season's going to look like? And have you started to hear that hubbub of the fall leaf peepers coming out already?
Yeah, and this weather has really energized people, and we got a question actually yesterday, I believe it was. This is from my co-anchor, who was out there doing a story about the Helene recovery. He wanted to know how this cool stretch of weather right now would impact the fall color. And, as best as I can tell, it probably won't have much of an impact at all. Typically, what you really want to see for the good color development is once you get into the fall, like September, you want to have some sunny days and those cool nights to really activate those pigments and get everything flowing. Dry weather can be actually good, but you don't want drought. So at this time of year, if you get a little break from the heat, what you might do is just kind of avoid some of that heat stress in the trees. And it could be beneficial, but probably not a big impact either way. What you don't want to have is one of those super muggy Septembers where it's like a low of 68 every night and the dew point's up there. You want to be cooling down into the upper 50s if you can, or whatever elevation. They can do 40s up there pretty easily, but you want to have those cooling downs each night.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was a big thing I was worried with the hot, dry weather we were having. I was like, oh man, I hope this doesn't have an early leaf fall, which a lot of trees will do that kind of defense mechanism of dropping their leaves early or even changing early just to protect themselves. But I think that we hit the perfect setup here where it finally got cool and wet, and that will deter that. But yeah, sometimes you're right. The weather in the fall is actually a little bit more important than what's happening here in the summer. Another weather thing that we hear a lot about, especially in August, are the summer cicadas. And we should emphasize these aren't the periodical cicadas, which come back, every 12, 13, 17 years, depending on the brood. These are the ones that come out every year, and they tend to love the hot, humid part of summer, and I always tend to notice them late July and August. But you have a great graphic explaining how the temperature really dictates how loud they are and how many of them that we end up seeing.
So this is a really cool question I got, Brad, the other day from one of our viewers. She lives in a really wooded area up here in the Piedmont, and she says on a normal hot summer day, it's just really loud. Pretty much every year. It doesn't matter how busy the cicadas are. They're singing, and they're making that big noise that they do. We all hear it. It's kind of that sound of summer. What she noticed is back on Friday of last week and into the weekend, and even now, she said, Tim, it's not that noisy anymore. What's going on? There's not really a lot of action happening. And so I had to kind of educate myself a little bit on what are cicadas, what do they like, what do they not like. So if you want to use them as a proxy for the temperature, let's go ahead and make a cicada thermometer. So here we go. What do they like to do? When they're singing loudly, that usually means the temperature is somewhere in the 80s to the 90s. Apparently, if it gets above 95, they can get some heat stress, just like we do. But these are cold-blooded creatures. When it gets cold outside, they aren't at their full strength, and they aren't doing everything as they normally do. So when it gets below 70 degrees, or even below 80 a little bit, they slow down. They might not be as noisy. And for example, lately, we've been below 70 the last couple of days, every hour of the day. Well, they tend to be pretty darn just quiet at that point. So to answer her question, I think it was a pretty cool one. Yes, there is a relationship between the temperature and the volume of the cicadas in your yard. There's some folklore about crickets too. You can use them as a proxy for a thermometer. Kind of some fun weather folklore. Yeah,
I was going to bring that up too. Crickets, the speed of their chirp is dictated by the temperature as well. And I always feel like that sound of cicadas is the sound of the dog days of summer. It really feels like that's when you hear them the loudest. You also, I will tell you, we get people freaked out. They see the cicada killing wasp. They come out this time of year as well because guess what? They're hunting those cicadas. The funny thing about those things, those are giant hornets and wasps. Sometimes people think of those murder hornets. They're not. They can sting people, but they don't. They kind of go for the cicadas more than anything else. But people see those all the time and freak out a little bit because they come out at the same time the cicadas do. Show's almost over, but we got to go to Lily. Any questions from our viewers? We had some great ones this week.
I will pull one up. What is the lowest record temperature over the summer that we've ever had?
Oh, man. See, we had August yesterday. So, Tim, the question was the lowest high temperature probably in the summer months that you guys have had.
Well, Lily herself should take credit because she just looked these up and put them in the chat. But the answer is the same for both Greensboro and Charlotte. The temperature is 56.
56. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's crazy. We had a 59 in August. I thought that was a 56. But I will tell you, I do remember a couple early June days in the past couple summers where it's been very, very nice. So, hey, just a sign of the season. We're almost to fall, and those will be an everyday occurrence. Have a great night, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow right back here.